everyone, and welcome to the Darkest Hour. I'm your host, Amanda Jane. At some point or another, we've all questioned our sanity, even just a little. Did you really leave the keys on the hook? Or did you throw them on the counter? Or was that yesterday? Usually, once we find what we're looking for, we move on, no longer questioning much of anything. But what if those little lapses stopped being so little? How far could you be pushed? In which extreme would you likely believe first? That you were actually losing your mind? Or that a ghost was messing with you? If we're natural skeptics, it's interesting how such seemingly small events can change the core of our beliefs to such a degree. Or, even more interesting, once we've changed that core belief, we can just as easily transition back to our old ways. Give us enough time and doubt, we'll be right back to our ways of being a skeptic. Tonight's stories come from both skeptics and believers, either looking for answers or just wanting to share. Either way, we explore them all here. So, let's get started, shall we? Just after turning 21, I moved out of the college dorms and into my own apartment. It was new construction, and I was living alone. I had just started settling in, but something already felt weird. While sleeping in my bedroom, I'd hear noises from the living room, or the bathroom door would open and close. I'm a chicken, so I just keep my eyes shut and go to sleep. I once went on a week-long trip and returned to my apartment being completely flooded. At the time, I chalked it up to the window being left open during the storm. I stayed with a friend after cleaning up, and when I came back 3 days later, I found massive handprints on my mirrors and walls. I am 5'2", and my hands are tiny. I can't even reach that high. I was spooked. A couple of months later, things began to escalate. I'd be sweeping the bedroom floor and notice somebody walking in the living room. Or I'd be talking with friends and they'd hear someone enter the apartment when nobody was there. One day, the security guard got a friendly puppy that loved me when I saw him downstairs. But even though he regularly entered other apartments, he refused to enter mine. When I picked him up and brought him inside, he began to shiver and cry. I immediately put him outside, and he calmed down right away. I bought plants, but they died. Eventually, I moved out, but I never understood what was happening in that apartment. I think my cousin and I fell into an unused dimension a few years ago. When I was 26, I had a small apartment in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and my cousin lived nearby. My complex was located in the middle of a densely forested area with a freeway running through the center, and we worked at the Wendy's located on the connecting highway. This meant we could walk to work, and yes, we walked on the freeway. It was scary yet necessary, but that's not the point. This story took place over the span of 3 days, and the shift itself only lasted 3 seconds, but when it ended, it was 40 minutes later. My cousin and I usually worked the night shift together. That would put us heading home around 3:30 a.m. One night, we were talking to pass the time as we walked down the freeway, and we noticed a single bright headlight coming towards us. But there was something strange about it. It was too bright. Still, I chalked it up to a motorcycle with some kind of new LED light, and thought no more of it. And yet, looking back, I now realize we didn't hear any of the sounds you expect to hear from a motorcycle. Anyway, we continued walking and talking as we moved to the opposite side of the road. It was completely dark out there, so we wanted to leave plenty of space for the passing motorist. There was nothing around except for the road and the forest on either side of us. You couldn't see anything beyond the first row of trees. No streetlights, nothing. Even with our phone flashlights, we couldn't see more than 5 feet ahead. But we didn't really need the lights anymore. It was a road we'd walked almost every night. We knew it well enough. We continued on our way, but after a few moments, I realized the motorcycle still hadn't passed us. We were still facing the light. It didn't disappear, it just hadn't passed us. The freeway was a concrete road, with one small bridge essentially acting as a border to our apartment complex, with us on one side and the forest on the other. Under the bridge was a creek. It ran around the complex and through the forested areas. The mystery light disappeared the moment it reached that bridge. I asked my cousin if he saw it too. Then I made him describe it to me, just as extra reassurance I wasn't losing my mind. Unfortunately, there was nothing to do but shrug it off and move on. The next night, again around 3:30, we were walking home. We saw a single bright light speeding down the road, even faster than before. We stopped and watched it to see what would happen, and this time, it didn't disappear. It kept going. But once it reached the other side of the bridge, it made an impossibly sharp left turn without slowing and seemingly drove into the forest. My cousin and I looked at each other in total confusion, unable to explain what we had just witnessed. It's impossible for anything to safely maneuver through the trees at that speed, even a motorcycle. We continued watching the light travel through the forest until it suddenly disappeared, about 200 feet in. We resumed our walk with a weird energy. I think what we saw made us both feel a little uncomfortable. We exchanged small talk as always, but we were paranoid and constantly checking our surroundings. Now, the next night's walk home is when things got crazy. We were about a quarter of the way down the road and discussing our experiences over the previous nights. Only this time, we didn't see a weird light. I was standing about 1.5 feet behind my cousin as we talked, and I pulled out my phone to see that it was 3:37. Then, suddenly, in mid-conversation, the whole world seemed to disappear. There was no warning. There was no shift effect or dragging sensation. The world was simply there 1 second, and the next, it wasn't. It reminded me of when a game clip fails to load properly. I stopped moving, walking, and talking. Instead, I just looked around, trying to figure out what the hell was happening. Somehow, I was standing in what looked to be some kind of unused dimension. There were no road, trees, sky, or floor. There wasn't even darkness. Everything was just white. There were no shadows or shade. It felt like I was standing on a piece of printing paper. Or if you're familiar with Dragon Ball Z, it looked like the first time Goku entered the hyperbolic time chamber. I couldn't even see my cousin anymore. I was scared and didn't know what to do. So I stopped mid-stride and my foot suspended in the air. I looked around for about 3 seconds, and just as unexpectedly as everything had disappeared, it returned in the same way. My cousin was suddenly 5 feet ahead of me now, but I assumed that happened because I had stopped walking and he didn't. I've read a few paranormal books that discuss wormholes, and small movements could sometimes land people miles away from where they started. Clearly, this wasn't the case for us, but I'm glad I didn't take any chances. Again, I made him tell me his story first in order to confirm we really had the same experience. And when I checked my phone, it was somehow 4:20. It felt like 3:37 had been only seconds before, yet somehow almost 45 minutes had passed. I tried to tell my cousin, but he hadn't seen the time before and didn't believe me. After arguing about the time change for a while, we realized we were no longer where we were when the dimension slip started. Instead of being 25 minutes away from my house, we had actually passed it. We only missed it by 200 feet or so, but it was still crazy. We know that's not where we were. My cousin and I still hang out occasionally, and to this day, we still talk about that night every time we see each other. Has anyone else ever experienced anything like this? Please let me know if you have. I've never met anyone else who has had this happen to them. For the last month, I've been visiting my boyfriend in Germany, and I've been hearing strange noises in his apartment. There's been scratching in the walls, heavy footsteps and thuds, but nothing super crazy. I just thought his neighbors were being weird, but apparently he only has one neighbor, an old man who lives on the opposite end of the hall. The rooms on either side of us are empty. He even confirmed it with the landlord. Last week, he told me about a shadowy, tall man with gray eyes who would sometimes open his door and peek inside. The first few times it happened, he thought it was an intruder, but it only ever peeks at him from the crack in the door. The apartment is entered through the hallway, and then there's a door to the bedroom. This entity can unlock the front door and open the bedroom door, just enough to look in on him. My boyfriend tries to ignore it. To be honest, I thought he was experiencing signs of schizophrenia or trying to scare me. But after last night, I believe him. We heard scratching again, so my boyfriend tapped on the wall and it actually answered him. It even unlocked the door last night. Today, the entity moved a key from his desk to another counter, and I know my boyfriend didn't do it because I was too scared to sleep last night. He never left my sight until he went to work. I haven't seen the entity yet, but my boyfriend says that this is the first time it's ever moved something. We think it enjoys scaring me, so I'm trying my best to stay calm. This apartment building used to be a retirement home, and the other floors are full, but the rent is more expensive. Please help. This is my first time dealing with something like this, and I am beyond scared. We need help. I don't know what to do. An update. It came back again tonight. I mixed salt and water together like a comment on my previous post suggested, and I sprinkled it around the entry room. I think I made it angry. I went to get dinner out of the oven, but I was afraid the ghost might be behind the door. I made my boyfriend stand in front of it, and the entity started banging on the door like crazy. But when my boyfriend opened it, nothing was there. He thinks he saw it in the mirror, though. I'm sobbing. I can't do this anymore. I don't know how he's lived like this for over a year. Next day update. Thankfully, there was no sign of it last night, and the entry room was extremely warm. My boyfriend said it hasn't been that warm in the whole time he's lived there. So I guess that means we can tell if it's here or not by temperature. At 4 o'clock yesterday evening, we showered together, and things were fine until my boyfriend noticed the entity trying to open the bathroom door, but it couldn't do it. It was extremely cold in the entry room, and once we made it to the bedroom, I yelled for it to go away, saying it wasn't welcome. After a few minutes, the room warmed up again. Maybe the salt water did help a bit. I don't know what else could have weakened it. Maybe it has to do with me not being so frightened anymore. This incident happened about 20 years ago, when I was 18 and in high school. I'm from Germany. Our school is divided into 3 types after elementary school ends, which is 4th grade. Gymnasium, which has nothing to do with sports. It's the type of school where you go to university after graduating. In the last 2 years of gymnasium, we had 2 main subjects to become our focus, and in the end, write our graduation exam on it. We have other subjects too. They're just not covered as thoroughly. One of my subjects was German. The classes were normally smaller, averaging maybe 15 students max, and we have the same teacher for the whole 2 years. The students in my German class all aged between 18 and 19. We all got along wonderfully and had a great teacher. She was 35 and always friendly, calm, and relaxed. There was an almost familiar atmosphere in our class. A month before our final graduation exam, we took a weekend trip to a hostel and reviewed all of our work from the previous 2 years in preparation. These kinds of trips aren't a common thing. We just did it because we were in a familiar atmosphere and wanted to have a little goodbye before our second year ended. The hostel was inexpensive and in a small village within an hour from our hometown. It was in an isolated forest, which was fine since people mostly used it for sleepovers when they went hiking. To save money, the women all slept in one room. It was a bit crowded, but no one seemed to complain. Some of the beds were the fold-out kind, and they didn't leave much space to walk around. We put new sheets on ourselves, and when we went to sleep, everything was fine. The night was calm, and I slept perfectly well. I'm normally an early bird, but the sun was already up when I woke. The room was still dim with the curtains drawn, and the others were still asleep. Needing to use the restroom, I silently left in search of the facilities. And when I returned, some of the others were now awake. It's always a little awkward when waking up with others, but we said our good mornings and everyone went on about their business. That's when I noticed an extremely weird, dark brownish red stain on the ground between mine and my best friend's bed. The diameter was roughly 5 to 7 centimeters. It wasn't huge, but it wasn't small enough to miss the previous evening. It was still wet and shiny too. It hadn't had time to dry. I didn't touch it, but it looked thick, and it was purely liquid, no clots or chunks. The floor was gray, so there was a strong contrast in colors. It was highly obvious. The strangest thing was its perfectly round shape. There was no smearing and no other stains or droplets. It looked like it just rose out of the floor. It was like in a movie, when blood oozes between the cracks of a wooden floor. Only this was a linoleum floor, with no gaps to ooze out of. When I showed everyone else, they were equally puzzled and weirded out. Our teacher looked at us like she was searching for the guilty party. I looked at the ceiling, wondering if something had dripped from above, but again, there was nothing. The entire ceiling was clean. My second guess was that one of the other girls may have had their period. Of course, that put my best friend under suspicion, because the stain was between our beds, and I wasn't on our period. I mean, it happens. That would have been fine, but even if it was menstrual blood. How would it be so isolated, with no stains or smears? I don't think anyone was walking around bottomless either. I just don't understand how it's possible. If it had been a nosebleed, there would have also been smaller droplets and someone would have claimed responsibility, but no one seemed to have any injuries at all. I wondered if an injured mouse could have left it there, but again, no smearing. And where did the animal go? We were all puzzled, and since I'm a rational person, my theory remained menstrual blood. Even if it was also technically irrational, somehow it was still the most rational explanation available. But everyone denied being the culprit. And I believed them simply because the spot was just that weird. It made no sense. We checked the rest of the floor for other stains, including under the beds, but there was just that one. In the end, our teacher cleaned it up with a handkerchief, and the floor was fine. There was no damage or anything. Basically, it didn't come from above. It didn't come from below. It was like the blood spot just appeared out of thin air. I still don't know what else it could have possibly been, except for blood. Very dark blood. It didn't look like juice or jam, no strange smell, at least, not that we noticed. I don't think it was a prank either. Neither the girls or the boys were that type, and the boys would have never dared to enter our room with the teacher present. Again, I'm a rather rational person, and I would love to have an answer for this, but I don't. It's probably a very simple one. At least, I hope it is. Once, I was home alone while my mother worked the graveyard shift, and she still hadn't returned home when I woke up for school the next morning. It was summer in the South, which meant rainy days and endless humidity. As I looked out my bedroom window, I noticed something in the condensation. The letters RL were written there, as if someone drew it with their finger. And it was done from the inside, not the outside. The next experience is why I lean towards believing in these things, even though I'm a skeptic. It happened a few weeks after my favorite uncle died of a heart attack. There was a 3x5 picture of him on a wall separating the kitchen from the living room. Mom and I were sitting in the living room nearby, and her recliner was right next to that wall. We started talking about my uncle, and his picture suddenly flew several feet, landing between us. The first time this happened, we thought it was a crazy coincidence. But it happened multiple times. Whenever we talked about him, his picture flew over to us. We joked that he was just saying hello. It was never a scary thing. It felt more like he was watching over us. I have a couple more that are scary, but they're also longer. I'll save those for later in case anyone's interested. As a teenager, I got a little too interested in the paranormal, and my experiences started getting too intense. That's when I realized I may have been dabbling with something I shouldn't be, and I prayed for it to stop. Since turning 18, I haven't had a single experience, even when I try to provoke one. It's like I'm cut off from it now. At this point, I don't know if I was awake or not, but it felt like it. Last time it happened, I still lived with my mom. This was the first time since I've been on my own. Last night, I dreamed of waking up paralyzed. I felt like I was taped to the bed. I couldn't move or speak. I could clearly hear an indistinguishable voice and loud footsteps pacing around my room. It just didn't feel right at all. I started a silent prayer that I'm somewhat familiar with. I'm not religious, I just knew I had to pray. I repeated it in my mind at least 10 times before the voices faded. I tried to move to see if I was awake. I managed to pinch myself a dozen times, but I couldn't feel anything. When I tried to sit up, I was pushed back down, and I tried to yell, but nothing came out. I couldn't see anything around me, but I finally managed to wake up and immediately pinched myself to ensure it was real this time. The other occasions at Mom's house weren't like this. I wasn't paralyzed to my bed thinking I was awake while I was really dreaming. Well, it probably was a dream anyways. I don't know. The voices, though, they were different this time too. Yes, I do have sleep issues, I know that. But for the last couple of months, I've been trying to adopt a healthier sleep schedule. But it doesn't seem to be working. Whatever happened last night just felt too real to be just a dream. This is my very first time posting anything, so forgive me if it sounds a tad awkward. The story I want to share occurred during the last half of 2021, when my partner and I lived in Australia. We rented my partner's grandparents' house after they were put into a nursing home. My partner was working as an EN, enrolled nurse, and usually returned around 7 p.m. I worked night shifts at a fueling station, but this happened on my night off. Our living room was a rectangle, and the north wall consisted of windows overlooking the front patio. To access the front door, one must walk up the driveway and directly past the front windows. The couches even faced those windows. If someone was in the living room, it was impossible to get by unnoticed. At 6:15 p.m., I was watching Dragon Ball Super in the dark, and the curtains had a gap big enough to see outside. That's when I heard the distinct sound of my partner's feet coming up the gravel driveway, opening the gate, and walking past the front window. I thought she'd gotten off early. I saw her walk past the gap in the curtains, but after a minute of total silence, I began to wonder why she wasn't coming inside. Curious, I went to the curtain and peeked outside. But to my surprise, she wasn't there. While pondering what just happened, I heard footsteps coming down the driveway, and to my utter bewilderment, it was her. Once inside, I asked if she forgot something in her car, but she hadn't. She'd just gotten off work early. I didn't say anything when she asked why. There's more to it, but this was the first thing that happened, and the creepiest. I'm a 20-year-old female, and I've never really dreamed. I only get sleep paralysis and nightmares. Each nightmare feels like sleep paralysis. Either I can barely move, or it feels far too realistic for my liking. In those, I've been beaten or hurt, and it feels terrible. I was once stabbed through the chest with a hot spike, and upon waking, I still felt the pain for hours afterwards. My sleep paralysis is much the same. All the nightmares I've had feel horribly dark and deep, like I'm drowning. if that makes sense. But I can handle them. Some are more annoying than scary. It's their frequency that's the problem. For as long as I can remember, my nightmares and sleep paralysis have happened in random clusters. When they start, they only occur during a random month of the year, and they occur every night for anywhere from a week to the whole month. Then, they won't happen again until the following year. It's not something I necessarily dread, but I wanted to ask the great, wise people of Reddit. It's happening again, so please let me know if anyone has a similar experience. Maybe we can figure out what's wrong. Or if nothing else, it may confirm I'm not just weird. This is one of my many past paranormal experiences. I've always had a ghost following me, and every house I've lived in until my most recent has been haunted. Occasionally, my girlfriend of a few years would find scratches on my back and suspect I was cheating on her. The fact that I never knew where they came from only made things worse. It was happening for years before I learned why my back was always burning or itching. Well, one grueling summer day, she and I were sitting at the end of our bed, and I was playing Assassin's Creed 3. She sat next to me watching and talking about random things. It was rare for us to have the same time off. This was the first time in months. We didn't have air conditioning, and I was sweating profusely. So I removed my shirt and I threw it in the dirty clothes bin. My girlfriend started kissing me, but ultimately, I went back to the game. It was just too hot. The sweat was dripping down my back and it burned like hellfire. Knowing something was wrong, I asked my girlfriend to see if there was a rash or anything that might be causing it to itch or burn. The moment she saw my back, she slapped my neck and began cursing furiously. Confused, I asked her what was wrong, and she responded with, "Who's the bitch you're screwing?" I insisted I wasn't cheating on her, and she demanded to know who put the scratches on my back. But I had no clue what she was talking about. Obviously, had another girl put scratches all over my back, I wouldn't have removed my shirt and asked my girlfriend to look at it. She thought about that for a moment, but still gave me a look of distrust. I asked her to take a photo so I could at least see what she was talking about, and she did. The pictures did not disappoint. All the way down my back were 3 huge red scratches. Then my girlfriend wanted to know how the scratches did get there, if it wasn't another girl, because she knew it wasn't her. I explained that humans have 5 fingers. Unless the other girl was missing a couple of digits, something else made those marks. We shared a laugh, but she still seemed unsure. I reminded her that with the exception of work and quick trips to the corner store, I hadn't left the house all week. She'd even been taking me to and from work since she was on vacation. I never had time to run off with anyone else. That reasoning finally seemed to put her at ease, and she suggested that I see a priest about whatever it is that's following me. She wanted to know how long the physical attacks had been occurring, but I couldn't say for sure. That was the first time I saw it for myself. It's not exactly an area I see every day. friends, it appears we've reached the end of tonight's episode, but don't miss a brand new one every Friday night, and my other weekly uploads every Sunday and Wednesday. Appreciate it if you would like this video, subscribe to The Darkest Hour if you haven't already, and talk to me in the comments. A huge shout out to all of my patrons who I appreciate so very much. Monica L, Tracy S, ZOEWATT, Shelly B, Donald C, Rat Girl, Alicia S, ERIN G, NIKKI H, Mr. Revenant, Naz K, Paul T, Brendan G, and The Darkest Hour's 2 newest patrons, Nicholas C and Tamara K. If you want to support The Darkest Hour in other ways, consider joining my Patreon. Check out patreon.com/thedarkesthour. I want to thank those who shared their stories, and a big thanks to all of you for listening. Do you have stories like these? I'd love to share them. Send them to me, amandadarkesthour@gmail.com, or on the Darkest Hour subreddit, The Darkest Hour YT. Stay spooky.